Hello, you're listening to Ask Us About Loom, a point-and-click adventure game podcast only on the We Made This Podcast network. I'm your host, Matt Latham, and as you can probably tell by the duration of this on your podcast apps, it's a smaller episode than usual because I've realised that I posted something on Twitter and Instagram about the future of the podcast and the plans for the podcast and stuff, and I thought, you know what, I perhaps should have done something on this. Now, I'm recording this at 2 p.m. on Saturday the 1st of April, so you know it's not an April Fool's joke. So basically, what's happening with the podcast? Well, the podcast has been on a bit of a break, but I'm kind of working on things behind the scenes. So I've kind of figured on what I'm actually going to be doing in terms of scheduling with the podcast. So in September, you're going to have season 2 of the podcast. Now, what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be actively making sure that I am working on episodes, recording way ahead of time, and then there will be an indeterminate amount of episodes released on a fortnightly basis from September. I don't know how many yet. I have a ballpark figure in my head, perhaps around 8 or 10, I'm not sure, but they're going to be released fortnightly. And I'm working on them right now. In fact, I have already recorded one episode of season 2 already. So yeah, look at me being productive. So there's a unheard of and half unedited episode of Ask Us About Loom in the ether somewhere. Well, if the ether is my hard drive. My hard drive doesn't sound as exotic as ether. But yeah. So that's basically what's happening in terms of the podcast. I'm gonna be asking guests if they want to come on and interacting with people who I've never spoken to before. I'm already in contact with some members of the We Made This Podcast network to talk about adventure games or games that they want to talk about as well, with people that have been podcasted on other podcasts and everything like that. I'm just kind of really excited to talk to people about games that they like and like all that kind of narrative things they want, and just talking about the genre and the wide scope and growing genre that has suddenly come back into fashion. And I hope it never fades away again because, boredom. One or two other things I'm going to mention as well, but before that, just so I can have some semblance of my rambling, I thought I'll let you know that over the past couple of months, and currently actually playing a few adventure games. Over Christmas, I got kind of really ill and with laryngitis and like physically hurt to talk. So, and at one point I was like, oh my God, will I ever podcast again? And a few people going, oh my God, yeah, he'll never podcast again. And sadly, I'm podcasting again. But during Christmas when I was ill, I decided to play Beyond the Steel Sky on the Switch. Sequel to Beneath Steel Sky. Beneath Steel Sky is one of my favourite adventure games of all time. I have to kind of play it every year or two, just as like watching a film. I just have to replay it. It's just one of those type of games, and I was really excited to finally be playing it. And I've heard mixed reactions over the story, etc., etc. And I started playing it, and yeah, I really like the kind of control system, and the way that you interact with this world, with the Switch and the menus, and how it kind of incorporates the quote unquote traditional ways of adventure games. And the only reason I say traditional is because I'm not much a fan of trying to be old fashioned or anything like that, because I think the genre needs to keep moving on and developing, and different games have different ways of how to interact with things, and I really quite like how this game does that. So it was quite fun to do that. But as much as that was interesting, the kind of design flaws, or no, not, are they flaws? The way that the game's design kind of starts to kind of get constrained by that kind of control system. So whereas like with a mouse-driven point-and-click 2D adventure game, you'd be going across all sorts of different multiple levels of Union City, interacting with a bunch of stuff. Here, it feels like you are confined to set pieces or locations. There's not really much scope for exploration and non-linearity in terms of things. So you kind of like, okay, you're in this one position, you've got a puzzle to sort, and you have to do that. Okay, you've done that. You're moving on to the next bit, and it feels very much kind of like the second half of Beneath. Well, not the second half. It's the final quarter of Beneath Steel Sky, when you're kind of almost on rails, but you are kind of traversing towards something. The game kind of feels like that from the get-go, because you kind of just like advancing to different parts, and there's no real kind of scope for real exploration and kind of freedom of movement that I think you have the illusion of with kind of older games. But it's just a bit of a shame because I really quite liked the kind of control system, how easy it was with the Switch. But um, but then in terms of the puzzles themselves, it kind of end up getting too dependent on the hacking mechanic in the game, which allows you to kind of use this graphical menu to kind of change the behavior of AI machines and stuff. And on one hand, some of it's quite satisfying when you work it out. On the other, they're either kind of too simplistic or it's used a lot and a lot. And whilst it's fun to kind of mix all these kind of combinations together, there's you kind of do wish there was something more to it than that. Yeah, and I think the only kind of final thing is the story. Now, the story I've seen kind of since completing it, I've ended up watching and reading a bunch of stuff and opinion pieces on the story, and it's I don't know. I'm not going to spoil. I don't really want to spoil how the story goes, and eventually, I kind of want to get into one day, perhaps have a whole episode on Beyond the Steel Sky. But the story itself, it seems to weirdly conflict itself and doesn't seem to have much cohesive sense when you actually apply national thought to it. The big bads at the end don't seem to make sense, and when you think about things, it's like I'm not sure. There's a nice kind of link back to having to go back into Link, which was quite nice and quite fun to do. Because I think Link's one of the high points or one of the more memorable points of the original, and it was just a bit. I don't know. I still need to I still need to compress about what I thought of the ending, which is kind of good, which means I can't spoil it for people accidentally. But and anyway, and moving on, thought I'll just quickly mention about the game I'm currently playing, which is Dreams in the Witch House or Dreams in Witch House. There's a definite article in there. Perhaps I'm currently forgetting, and I apologise for forgetting it straight away. But yeah, this is an adaptation of the H.P. Lovecraft story of the same name, which I haven't actually read. But yeah, and it's kind of like an open world point and click adventure game, and what that means is that it's set in the late 20s. You're in Massachusetts, a town slash city called Arkham, and you play a guy called Walter who goes into this like room, this kind of like crappy room, gets harassed by this rat with a human face, starts having weird dreams, but then pretty much how you do anything is up to you. You can go to university and study. You can study maths. You can study the occult. You can talk to people. You can do all sorts of things. And then but you've also got survival elements. So you have to keep your sanity up. You have to keep your hunger up. You have to keep dry. You have to keep warm. And you'll run out of money. And you have to do odd jobs. And it uses time. There's an ongoing, not real time, but time kind of moves throughout the game. And there are all sorts of things just in order to survive. And as the game kind of goes on, the survival elements start making things slightly harder, and you begin to have to make some decisions about whether you want to eat or stay warm. And yeah, kind of like any college students in the modern day, more or less, just 100 years ago. I'm not exactly sure where I am into it. I've just been trying to survive and working out. I'm too scared to do some of the horror bits. And at one point, I'm kind of thinking, it's a bit samey. I'm not exactly sure when the story's going to develop. And I think I accidentally, I kind of did something that I had the option of doing slightly earlier in the game. And then something started to open up a bit more. And I'm like, oh, okay, perhaps I should have done that slightly earlier. So, and I've not got that much further, so I can't really explain more about what the game is. But the open worldness seems limited at first, but then learning that I think there are more areas to explore and that I've been quite limited, I think it's quite interesting that if I carry on with this game, I can go back and perhaps start doing things slightly earlier and seeing how that changes the game and everything. Yeah, it's just a shame it's not very. This is a very limited ramble review, of course, but I am very much enjoying it. It's crapped me up a few times, and I'm not a fan of horror if I'm in general, but it does amplify that kind of sense of dread, everything, and yeah, and the survival and kind of like hoping to cope through stuff kind of translates quite well. And I quite like how this game is incorporating that open worldness to it, which, if I'm to be fair, I'm quite impressed by, and I'm hoping that other developers kind of look at this game and thinking, oh, so this is how they've implemented that kind of thing. I'm wondering whether you can implement it in that other kind of ways. I'm quite looking forward to going and carrying on. I'm planning on going back and continue with the game a bit later on today. So yeah, so those are perhaps like the two games I've been playing recently. So in terms of future episodes of the podcast, so it's a long wait till September, of course, but I am not going to leave you hanging. I am actually going to be doing a couple of like specials in the meantime. So I've got plans for in the next coming months. Look, 2 episodes dropping. Next week I am recording an episode which will be dropping at the end of April, and I'm planning on trying to get another one done for July. Yeah, so you're not completely devoid of Matt asking us about Loom content if you really if you're really looking forward to more of that. But then from September, I'm aiming to doing kind of like between 8 to 10, depending on. That's what I'm aiming for, but I'm not going to commit to a exact number. A couple of episodes fortnightly as season 2, so you get something that Ask Us About Loom's never really had that I've always wanted, which is regularly dropped content. Yes, regularly drop content. But until then, I think that is enough from me. I just wanted to say hello, just to make sure that the feeds are live, just make sure that you are still listening, hopefully still following. Anyone who wants to say hello, who has thoughts about Beyond the Steel Sky and the story, feel free to either email me at askusaboutlloom@gmail.com, follow me on Instagram or Twitter under askusaboutlloom. I'd love to hear from you. And if there's anyone or any people that you think might make good guests, feel free to suggest them to me, because I'd love to talk to anyone. Look, trust me, I'll talk to anyone. I'll talk to a brick wall if a brick wall can play games. It'd be very weird if a brick wall can play games. I've been playing Dreams in the Witch House too long. I'm starting to think walls are sentient. Yeah. I'm going to cut off now, but thank you for listening. Thank you for still following. If you're listening to this now, I apologise for the rambling, but please do give Beyond the Steel Sky a play, give Dreams in the Witch House a play as well, and I look forward to speaking to you again in perhaps about a month's time. So yeah, I don't know how to sign off. Bye!